Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Revelations with Erin Pizzey. On this show, we will be exploring the issues faced by men and boys everywhere. We will be sharing our perspectives and your own. Your host, Erin Pizzey, was born in 1939 in China while her father was stationed there as a member of the British Foreign Office. In 1971, Erin opened the first ever domestic violence refuge for battered women and children in Chiswick, England. What she found, however, was that many of the women coming into her shelter were as violent as the men they were fleeing. Over the years, she also tried to create resources and safe spaces for men as well as women, but frequently met with indifference and hostility to men suffering. Nevertheless, it's a passion she continues to hold to this day for men, for women, and especially for children.
For so many years, feminists have been able to demonize men under their artificial argument called patriarchy. Hi, I'm Erin Pizzey, and through working with battered women in my refuges, I saw for myself how family violence is passed on from one generation to the next. Quite simply, violent behavior experienced in childhood is often carried forward into adult relationships. Family violence is not a gender issue, and never was. It's a generational issue. To my amazement, nobody ever wanted to hear why violent people treat each other the way they do. Instead, feminists have had people believe that men are responsible for all the violence in our society. There is sufficient evidence that both men and women can be equally violent in their personal relationships, but for many years, men and boys have been held to ransom and have been made to live in the knowledge that they are dispensable and shamed. There is an enormous job ahead of us, but my hope is that the 21st century will see men and women standing shoulder to shoulder and working together to actively take on the feminists and to show everyone that domestic violence is not and never has been a gender issue.
The truth is that men and boys are not privileged in our society, but are often marginalised, disadvantaged and ignored. We will be inviting you to call in and discuss your views and your experiences. Anyone of any age, sex, sexual orientation or religious background is invited to call in and talk. We may not get to everyone, but we will do our best within the show's allotted time. If you do wish to call in to share your own experiences, you will probably want to keep things on a first-name basis. You may wish to use a pseudonym for yourself or family members so that there's no concern about privacy. Welcome to Revelations with Erin Pizzey and her co-host, Dean Esme. The truth is often painful to hear, but in truth there is hope, and we hope you will stick around to hear it.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to this week's episode of Revelations with Erin Pizzey. Our host today, as usual, is the incomparable Erin Pizzey. Say hello to everybody, if you would, Erin.
Hello, everybody.
Good to hear from you. Erin, as usual, is joining us from London. I'm here from my Michigan abode. Today, our special guest is going to be Professor Martin Fiebert of California State University. Before we bring Professor Fiebert on to speak, I wanted to make a couple of brief announcements, very brief. First off, during the month of September, the Revelation show was running an unusual schedule. Our regular listeners will know we air every other week, not every week. During the month of September, we ran every single week because of so many events that were going on, and especially in Toronto and Canada and the men's movement. So we did run every week in September, but we are now back to every other week. So we're here every other Saturday. Also, special announcement, is that another show that some of you who are familiar with A Voice for Men may remember, Tales from the Infrared, which is our men's show for geek culture, to talk about things like games, video gaming, science fiction, that sort of thing. Tales from the Infrared is returning and will be airing also every other Saturday, basically alternating with Revelations with Erin Pizzey. So this Saturday, of course, we're here with Erin and our special guest, Professor Fiebert. Next Saturday in this same time slot, Tales from the Infrared will be returning. And the week after that, we'll be back with Erin. The week after that, Tales from the Infrared will be back, and so on. And the shows will be alternating. And the new host of Tales from the Infrared, by the way, is Christian Schiessen. I will be helping him and being his sidekick, and we may see Typhon Blue and some others appearing, but Christian Schiessen will be the host of the return to Tales from the Infrared. Christian Schiessen is also joining us today. He's running the back room of the show, so if you call in to speak to us, expect to hear from Christian first, and he'll bring you on. I want to thank Christian for joining us today. James Huff, our normal sound engineer, is off on a very much needed vacation. So, with that out of the way, I would like to bring on the line Professor Martin Fiebert. Professor Fiebert, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us, especially because I know it's very early where you're at. It's about 8 a.m. out there in California, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, my pleasure. I'm eager to be involved.
Now, for those who don't know, Professor Fiebert, I hope he doesn't mind if I call him Marty, thank you, has been involved in domestic violence research, intimate partner violence, domestic violence research, and other related topics for, well, I'm guessing at least 15, 20 years, if not more. Does that sound about right, Marty?
I'd say about 20 years, yes.
And what on earth got you interested in such a subject?
Well, it turned out I was teaching a class in male roles in the 1980s.
Male roles?
Yeah, psychology of male roles.
Okay.
I don't teach it anymore, but I did at the time. And a friend of mine had a local cable TV show. He was a doctor, and it was Domestic Violence Week. And we were chatting in a social gathering, and he mentioned that he's doing that, and I said, well, I've come across some research where men are victims of domestic violence, and he seemed interested in that, so he invited me to the show, and on the show was myself as the only male, and then there was a female district attorney, a woman who worked in a domestic violence shelter, a victim of domestic violence, and you know, each one had their own story, and as they relayed their stories, they turned to me and asked me what I knew about the field, and I mentioned that my research showed, not my research, but the research I was familiar with showed that there was a gender parity in terms of domestic violence, and they were shocked about it, and they, well, in a polite way, essentially ganged up on me and challenged me to prove that, and I knew a little bit, but I didn't know a lot. So after the show was over, I started to compile my bibliography on all the research I could find that was relevant in the area, particularly a lot of work by Murray Strauss and Richard Gellis and R.L., who was involved in research too, McNeely. And so in 1997, I published the first bibliography in sexuality and culture with about 74 studies. And then I've revised that every few years, and so now the latest publication has about 343 studies, some of them empirical and some of them are reviews, but essentially show that there's gender parity, or in many cases, particularly with young people, with teenagers, that women are more likely to assault their male partners.
I'm going to interrupt you for a minute there, Marty.
That's the basic story.
I'm going to interrupt you there a minute, Marty. First, I want to tell everybody in the audience, Professor Fiebert, who is with California State University, Long Beach. I'm sorry, I said University of California. I meant California State University at Long Beach. He is actually quite well known for what a lot of us simply refer to as the Fiebert bibliography, which is what he just mentioned, which he first published in 1997. You can find that online on his webpage. If you simply type Fiebert bibliography, F-I-E-B-E-R-T, bibliography into Google, it's the first thing that comes up. What you'll usually find online there is an older version of his bibliography, which is also reproduced on the Voice for Men wiki. But if you go to CSULB, which I assume stands for California State University Long Beach, I'm not sure what that was, California State University Long Beach, csulb.edu/tilde M. Fiebert, you'll get more, including the latest copy, or the latest version of his bibliography. That was published in the peer-reviewed scientific journal Sexuality and Culture. So that is a peer-reviewed scientific journal, is it not, Professor Fiebert?
Yes, it is.
Sexuality and Culture, and that's a peer-reviewed paper that you've published.
Right, and it was published, the online version was published in August, so it's pretty recent. The hard copy has yet to come out, but I think it will in the next issue.
And this bibliography examines, I'm quoting right from it, this bibliography examines 343 scholarly investigations, 270 empirical studies, and 73 reviews and or analyses, which demonstrate that women are as physically aggressive or more aggressive than men in their relationships with their spouses or male partners. The aggregate sample size in the reviewed studies exceeds 440,000 and change. It's an important bibliography, and of course it is peer-reviewed, which means you will be, if you check that bibliography, you can also check every single paper in that bibliography to back up what Professor Fiebert is saying. This tends to startle people. What do you find is the usual reaction, Marty, when you tell people women are about as violent, maybe even more violent than men in intimate relationships? What do you find is the typical reaction?
Well, it depends on who I'm telling. Now, I think that there's been a growing sophistication among social science researchers, both men and women, that when you look at the literature, you do see gender parity. Now, they're going to have issues around that, and we'll probably talk about that. The lay public is pretty mystified because I guess the basic information in the culture is that women are the victims and men are the perpetrators. I did a study a number of years ago where I expose this information to my students. So I did a survey before I presented information, and about, I'd say, 30% of them believed in equality and gender parity and intimate partner violence. And then after I presented the data, many of them changed their opinion, so it got to be about 70 to 80%. So I think that people will change their views as information is presented to them. But I think at this point, that in the general culture, people are not very much aware of this.
I've seen reaction in the academic culture as well. I don't know about in social science journals, but certainly many universities, in my experience, are not teaching this information.
No, they're not. And there are, there's a politics in the university of political correctness and women's studies, and people are not aware. But then again, there are a significant number of researchers in the field. There are a number of journals, both in America and in England, that are bringing this information to the public. So I think things have changed. When I have presented at conferences maybe 15 years ago, there'd be kind of a strong negative reaction to what I was saying, not quite heckling, but close to it. Now it's accepted more or less as a factual area, but people will disagree. For example, they might disagree who's seriously injured, who's initiating the aggression, and those sort of issues are worth talking about. I think the person who's been really at the forefront of this, aside from Erin, who has for many years, is Murray Strauss. And Murray has presented for many years, and I think he would also agree with me that things have changed over the years.
Well,
the reaction to him, his work is much less negative than it used to be.
It's interesting. I may actually challenge you on that a little bit. But before I do, we have on hold a caller that I would like to go ahead and bring on the line. We have Attila Vinzer of Toronto, Canada, on hold and would like to talk a little bit. I happen to know that Mr. Vinzer, who is also recently joined the Voice for Men editorial team, is planning on holding an inclusive conference on domestic violence issues in Toronto this upcoming May. Attila, are you on the line?
Yes, I am on the line. Thank you for that introduction, Dean. Professor Fiebert, it is a distinct pleasure to be able to speak with you on the show today. I need to tell you that you are one of my bigger heroes in terms of having the understanding of the importance of bringing factual data forward about domestic violence. It is absolutely invaluable to the betterment of men and women. So I wanted to thank you for that. I know that you and I had spoken a little while ago, and unfortunately, due to family matters, including having to rescue my son recently from a charge that was brought against him maliciously by a female school principal who initiated the chain of a process which had my son charged and arrested, fingerprints taken, mugshot taken, and he was threatened to be put in jail if he did not sign a particular document at the police station.
12 years old.
12 years old. As a consequence, it has motivated me even more so that we must bring matters of fact forward by people such as yourself, Professor, because you cannot argue with the facts. And I heard you a little bit saying that things have changed, and I certainly was not involved in this 15, 20 years ago. 15, 20 years ago, I was busy building a business oblivious to the fact of what was brewing in the background until I became a victim of domestic violence to a level that my divorcing wife and her family had conspired to falsely accuse me of certain sexual acts against my own child, which if I had not had the intuition and the knowledge to tape record what they were doing, today I wouldn't be talking to you, but rather I would have been a destroyed human being in prison and on the sex registry list. This sort of thing must absolutely stop.
I agree. I'm sorry to hear about that circumstance in your personal life.
Well, I think maybe what Attila's getting to there, he was eventually found innocent of everything. We know this. But what he's getting into there is, or I would guess that he's getting into, is that the widespread popular assumption that violence is primarily a male upon female and male upon children problem leads to legal policies and assumptions by legal authorities that in the overwhelming majority of cases, the man is the perpetrator, period, and must be lying if he says it's any other way. I think that's why, work like yours is important. But Attila, you had mentioned you are planning on holding a conference in May, correct? Can you tell us about this?
Yes, I can. It will be held hopefully at the Toronto Convention Centre in Toronto in May. The date has not yet been fixed, but I guarantee that the event is going forward regardless of which venue we end up choosing and regardless of the specific date that we end up choosing. And Professor, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm going to ask you here now, if you are available in May, we will again make sure that we bring you out to Toronto, as I think that you would be the man, the person who would be most suitable to be our keynote speaker, as in my view of all the documentation, of all the literature that I've read, there is no other person that has such an authority about domestic violence issues as you do, Professor.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll have to see about May. I mean, that's the end of my semester, and I'm busy in at least through the first 3 weeks of May. So.
Well, I'll tell you what. I will put the two of you in contact with each other after the show.
We'll talk about the logistics of that at another point.
I do know that Erin will be there, won't you, Erin?
Certainly. I look forward to seeing you there, Marty, if you can be there.
Yes.
And we're going to be doing our best. I believe there's going to be quite a number of other people planning on attending that, too. I wonder if any feminist groups will be attending that, Attila.
I am pretty much guaranteed that there will be. However, it's very important that we bring truth and fact forward. And if there's anybody that is going to continue to relentlessly attack us with absolutely unwarranted, nebulous accusations that are so foolish, it's childish. It's beyond childish. It's kindergarten-like. The reality is women, feminists, the establishment, the police forces must understand that domestic violence is not a woman issue. It is a family issue. And a family is comprised of potentially a man, a woman, and children, and various variations to that, as we have come to understand in our recent history. I also want to share that off the record, I have police officer friends who tell me that they know men are being shafted, but they also tell me that they are mandated and they are ordered to arrest the male as a means to mitigate liability against the police force. And this has been going on since the Ralph Hadley inquiry in Ontario, which is the province in Canada that I live in and I'm most well-versed in. And they capitalized on a very unfortunate murder-suicide where Ralph saw no other way of protecting his children than to murder his wife and commit suicide. The women's shelter industry, the women's rights industry capitalized on that, and they obviously wanted to make sure that the suicide note was not ever heard or seen of, which described exactly what this man had done strictly to protect his children.
Well, anecdotes like this are always very powerful and moving, but of course they are merely anecdotes, and so the important part of a conference like this is to have academics and experienced people like Erin from various points of view to share their view, and I really wish you luck to that with that conference, Attila, and I intend to help you as best I can. I intend to be there as well. In any case, I hope others will think about, and they're now on notice, there will be a domestic violence conference, an inclusive international one coming up in May. So we hope to see you there. Now, moving back to Professor Fiebert, Attila just mentioned something that I was going to give you a little pushback on. The idea that there is more acceptance that intimate partner violence is not really a gendered issue or not really a man-on-woman problem. Now, you're saying roughly 15 years ago you encountered scoffing and hostility on that, right?
I wouldn't say, academics, at least in my realm here, are pretty soft-spoken, so people were skeptical, I would say, and somewhat, there were one or two who were more aggressive, but as I say, things have changed, and I think that there's more general acceptance. Now, out in the, quote, real world of police and courts, I think changes have been slower, but I think that they have moved in the right direction. I'm very impressed with the work of John Hamill, who's organized this journal, Partner Abuse, and he's written a gender-inclusive approach to partner violence, and I think he's had a significant effect, not only in terms of the research, but also in terms of the social milieu, at least in California. So
John Hamill?
Yeah.
His name is John Hamill?
H-A-M-E-L. Yeah.
H-A-M-E-L. And what's the name of his journal again?
Partner Abuse.
Partner Abuse is the name of the journal. Is it also a peer-reviewed journal?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Very much so. And, John Hamill, Gender Inclusive Treatment of Intimate Partner Abuse is the book he published in 2005. And he not only looked at the research, but he also has like a treatment program for both men and women who are involved in intimate partner violence. And I think he's a very important, and he also organized a number of conferences in California for a few years. I think
I went to them. Yeah, I went to the one in Sacramento, which is the first,
right.
And then and then LA was the second.
Yes. And
but you see, I was going to ask you, Marty. You see, I've always said from the very beginning that the patriarchy argument was really more to do with building the funding for a movement and a just cause. My feeling from the very beginning was, particularly as I used to do 3-generational questionnaires with my mothers coming in, that I could trace the violence back through the generations, because I've always said it's generational. It's a family issue, it's a human issue, it's a generational issue. And if we can get away from the entire radical feminist concepts, which they've brainwashed, essentially, and back to where it really matters, because it's not about men and women, it's about children being born into those toxic relationships, because there's damage even from before birth.
That's true. That's true. And
how are we going? But my question, I know that you have a huge reputation in universities and among the academics that you work with. My argument is at some point we have to swing an enormous amount of thinking around and, in a sense, completely obliterate the last 40 years' worth of conferences and arguments and books and women's studies and you name it, it's happened to change the public thinking and the establishment thinking and fundamentally the government thinking. It's a huge job.
Yeah, and there's a lot of inertia in the system, and there's a lot of, it's like the feminist perspective is ingrained, and it's economically ingrained. I mean,
I know.
The Violence Against Women Act, which...
That's Joe Biden, isn't it? He's the one that champions it in your government.
Uh-huh. Well, and nobody challenges it because, if they did challenge it, then they're fearful of losing votes and
there are people in universities who stood up at those conferences and said if it was known that they were at this conference, they'd lose their job at the universities that they were teaching at.
Well, not if they were tenured. They wouldn't lose their jobs, but they may lose a little,
Well, they might get knocked off of tenure track, I think. One of the things I've encountered is
well, if they're not tenured, then they're vulnerable. Once they're tenured and, associate or full professors, they're much less vulnerable, though they may feel that if they speak up too much, they might be at some risk in terms of grants or other goodies within the university.
I have been approached privately by almost exclusively women, but I don't know why that would be, except that women have come to dominate the social sciences fields. But I've been approached privately by any number of them who say, they're young women mostly, who will approach me privately and say they appreciate what we're doing with this show with Erin. They appreciate the advocacy work we do for male victims, and tell me they're frankly afraid to say anything. in the line of work they're in because they're afraid it will hurt their careers. They'll never get tenured. They won't be able to work in these shelters. They may not. They may even be, they may just be undergrad, or they may be just, graduate students. And it's like, if you don't keep your mouth shut, you're not going to graduate. And
I find that with social workers as well, because the literature that they're taught from essentially is feminized. And many of them know the truth because they are, say, normal individuals. And they say the same thing, that they know that if they want to get their degrees, they have to shut up and write what they're told to write. And that's a tragedy in this day and age.
Yeah. Well, let me, since we're talking about, I mentioned John Hamill, there was this series of research projects that he organized for this journal, Partner Abuse. And I'm very impressed with that. There was a paper called Prevalence of Physical Violence in Intimate Relations, Rates of Male and Female Victimizations, and then a second paper on rates of male and female perpetrations. And it was, the first author is Sarah Demare. And it's 5 authors. I'm the 5th author in the project. And what they did is they looked at every study from the year 2000 to 2010 that was ever published in any journal worldwide. And they came to the conclusion that there's essentially gender parity both in victimization and perpetration. And and I think that there's a link to this that Dean and I talked about earlier, and I think that people who are interested in the facts should connect into that, and that's a very important and powerful set of evidence that should be made available.
I'll give that to everybody now, and I'll put it in the chat room. And there's actually 3 different websites that contain the identical information, but probably the easiest one to remember is domesticviolencefacts.org. Just one word, domesticviolencefacts.org. And Marty, like you just said, you were one of the authors of the information on this piece, along with a number of other academics, right?
Right, and actually 2 of them are from Canada, from Simon Fraser University, Kim Reeves and Tanya Nichols.
If you just review the page, it's almost breathtaking how much is there. It says the world's largest domestic violence research database, 2,657 pages with summaries of 1,700 peer-reviewed studies, classical video presentations, stuff on prevalence rates, context of abuse, abuse worldwide by ethnic and LGBT groups, gay and lesbian and so on, risk factors, impact on victims and families, victim issues, prevention and treatment, criminal justice responses. There's just an incredible amount of data there. I had fancied that I was going to do a comprehensive review of this webpage when Marty told me about it a few days before the show. And I started looking. I said, okay, I will need a few months to do a comprehensive review of this because it is a comprehensive. There's an extraordinary wealth of data there, and I strongly encourage.
And it's very accessible. I mean, some journals you have to subscribe to the journal to be able to get it. He made it accessible so anyone can download that. And not only do they have tables, they have the actual studies that the thing is based on. So I was very impressed with that. And that's why I'm saying, if you look at the trajectory of where things were 20 years ago, where they are now, there's much more information out there. And many of the researchers are women who have taken some risks in their career, but they've really moved forward to present this information. So I think, as I said, those who are objective, who are looking at this field, are now aware of pretty much gender parity in intimate partner violence. Now, where the changes are slower to take place are in legislation, in the courts, and in the police departments. And so that's where I see the next range of change evolving to. It's probably better now in those venues than it used to be, but it's still pretty much behind the times in terms of what the information is available.
Where I'll challenge you a little on that as well is that, but here's the thing. I know there are already members of the audience screaming, "He's nuts. It's worse than ever." And I'll tell you what the answer for them and for you is at the same time. Having looked at it, what I have found is that at least within the United States, I cannot speak outside of the United States, but I have found that within the United States, there are some counties and some municipalities which are adopting policies that I would say are moving more in the right direction. But if you don't happen to live in that particular county or municipality or whatever it is, then it doesn't apply to you. I mean, like, for example, I had a friend who lived in Eugene, Oregon, who said there had been some major changes there where he lived in Eugene. He wasn't sure it was quite the exact right policies, but he did say one of the things they do now is if they make any arrest, they arrest both parties and then separate them and start their questioning from there, which I don't know if that's necessarily the best policy, but is certainly a much better policy than let's just drag the man out. So this is not even to say Eugene, Oregon has the best policy in the world. It is merely to say that Professor Fiebert has it right in the sense that there are places where improvements are happening. And I think that's in part due to his work and the work that others have talked about. At the same time, I'm going to go back to tell you there's vast swaths of the United States, and from what we can tell, all of Canada, most of Australia, the United Kingdom, no, it isn't getting better, at least not from what I can see. I mean, what are you finding, Erin, there in the UK?
No, it's not getting better. One of the problems we have is there's so many women, members of Parliament, who are essentially radical feminists with a hatred of men that's pathological. So it's going to be very difficult. And I'm very upset in that our present government, and this is Cameron, who is our Prime Minister, almost as soon as he got in was talking about heroic women and feckless men. And that has cast a huge shadow over the thinking and the changing that needs to take place. I was shocked, actually. It was 1999 that the British crime figures, national crime figures, first even mentioned that men could be victims. And you think for all those years, they just ignored men. And the actual attitudes, so now we're not just facing the fact that men are demonized in their homes and with their children, but boys are demonized. And we have a huge imbalance now between the glorification of everything that is women and the denigration of everything that is fathers and men. I certainly know that of Canada, because, Marty, I was there for 6 weeks with Senator Ann Coles. We travelled across Canada talking to men's groups, and this was 10 years ago. And I am half Canadian. My mother was Canadian, and I am so hoping that when I go there in May, I really can see some changes, because I found Canada frightening.
Yeah, that's what I've also heard that. It's pretty dismal in Canada. That's true. But California is, I think, moving in an enlightened direction, and I think some other areas too. So.
Well, I'm all for California. I'll be in LA from November till January next year, and I'm there regularly. So I'm going to make it my business to meet with people there and to make sure, because I do have great faith, actually, in California. It's a very liberal, very civilized place, and we need to make those changes felt.
Well, I know some people in California who might argue with you, but I have heard some good things about California getting better in this particular area. Believe it or not, I've also heard about some good improvements happening in parts of Texas, which it has this reputation for being radical and reactionary, but I've heard of some good changes happening, not perfection by any means, but some good changes happening there. Still, there is blowback on it. I mean, we recently had a rally and demonstration and talk in Toronto just a few weeks ago, which was very exciting and invigorating. Professor Miles Groff gave a talk there, a lecture on the problems young men face in education. We had a rally in defense of men and boys in crisis, of which the domestic violence issue is one of them, and we got some blowback there. I remember I myself gave a speech where I said men are as likely to be abused by their wives or girlfriends as vice versa, and we had a protester there scream at me at the top of his lungs, "You're a liar." I said, "No, I'm not."
Well, the other thing that's happened, of course, just putting it in a larger context, is that, things have gotten so polarized in America, and I'm sure in other countries too. I mean, look, our government is not even able to function. The differences between, quote, red states and blue states are enormous on so many issues, on health care, on abortion, on immigration, and then people have lost the ability to communicate, compromise, work things out. So, when we come to the issue of domestic violence, you're going to see again this theme of polarization and demonization of the other side. It's part of that larger context of not being able to communicate. So I think that's the other part of the skills that John Hamill and others are promoting, is learning to be able to communicate, to listen, to empathize, to expand your repertoire, to change your value systems, things like that.
Speaking of a little bit of blowback, we have on hold a caller I'd like to bring on, Dan Perrins, who has a bit of a background himself in dealing with domestic violence and related issues on a personal level and has experienced some of that blowback himself. Dan, are you there?
Hi, yeah. Hi, Dean. Hi, Erin. Hi, Mr. Fiebert. Pleasure to meet with you, so to speak.
Yeah.
I've cited your work numerous times, countless times. I can't remember how many times, but I was wondering if you've received any, threats or any sort of blowback from, I'm going to say, feminist gender ideologues.
Never.
Not one.
That actually surprises me.
Well, I'm in a pretty isolated world. My work is not in the front lines of either the legal or the political system. It's really more in the realm of empirical research studies, of talking to colleagues, of collecting data. It's a different environment.
But Erin, let me ask Erin. Erin, haven't you told me that not just you, but some of the other researchers you've known have
yes. Yes.
Tell us a little about that.
Well, I remember in the early days when Richard Gellers and Mary Strauss and Susan Steinmetz, she actually stopped.
That's true. In the 70s and 80s when they first started presenting their data, they really were.
They were really threatened. And even not that long ago, when I was with Senator Ann Coulls, when we got to Vancouver, there was a phone call apparently from one of the radical groups saying they were going to bomb where we were speaking. And so the whole place was crawling with police. It's not one's most comfortable feeling. You feel very vulnerable. I was regularly picketed and threatened, and phone calls would come in. And even when I was doing Reddit, you remember that, Dean?
Oh, yes, we were doing the Ask Me Anything session on Reddit, and we actually had what were obviously organized groups attempting to, well, it's called downvoting, but essentially attempting to squelch the conversation with Erin, which was all pretty ultimately got down to her supposed horrible lie that women could be as violent as men. So there's a definite, I would just say, reactionary element out there that doesn't want to hear this. I'm pleased to hear that you haven't faced that. I hope you don't wind up facing it now that we've mentioned you. In the context of our show.
I really didn't expect Mr. Fiebert. I really didn't expect you to say no. I'm on the micro level. Okay, I'm one guy in a small town called Hamilton, Ontario, and I put up posters showing the bar graphs from Stats Canada showing parity. Okay, and I've been attacked by a gentleman with a makeshift club for doing this. These individuals come by after I put the posters up, and they literally gouge into the aluminum poles, taking down the posters. There's that much anger just that I'm putting these facts and statistics out there, and it just angers them so much. It seems.
You have to remember, though, it is such a personal issue for so many people, and this is why it's such a dangerous subject, because you have people who are walking earthquakes or volcanoes because they've never dealt with the damage that they felt. And if they, as an example, a man who as a child watched his mother beaten into the ground and bleeding, any suggestion that women could be violent will threaten him because his whole being is actually still seething with resentment about what happened to his mother, and the same with women. So I think you have to remember this isn't just a normal subject that everybody can research, discuss. It's core to our human being that if you have been violated and abused, you will find it very hard to
Erin,
have to be. Yeah.
I have no argument at all that it is a touchy subject, and I agree it is a touchy subject. And I do not deny that there are women, there's men out there who are jerks. I'm just going to use a polite word, but, I'm not going to deny that it happens, okay? But conversely, we have feminism denying that, there are female jerks out there, shall we say.
Sure. Yeah, I know.
Have them denying that. Now, I talked a little bit with some professionals about the young gentleman who attacked me, and we came up basically with two or three different ideas. One was the one that you just mentioned about, he was possibly raised and watching his mother getting beaten. The second was possibly he was white knighting for a feminist girlfriend. And the third was that he's just a gender studies student.
I wouldn't think he was white knighting because that is such an extreme reaction that I would think it's probably a lot to do with something deep inside him.
I haven't talked to the gentleman. Just three possibilities.
One of the
I go for the second.
We do have another caller on the line, so we're going to move on. Thank you for your call, Dan. I think it's very good to hear that as far as Professor Fiebert goes, he so far hasn't faced any blowback, and maybe he won't. He's certainly, you can't argue with his scholarship, I don't think. Although I have seen a common argument against your scholarship, and I'm going to ask you about that in a minute. However, on hold, we have another caller going by the name of Searle. Searle, can we bring you on the line, please?
Hello, it's nice to be on, and it's a pleasure to be on the air with you, Erin.
Thank you.
Wanted to phone in to talk about the education bit you mentioned earlier and how people are teaching you interesting gender narratives there. I'm currently doing an access course at Wiltshire College. That is, well, for all the American listeners, college in England is between the ages of 16 to 19 normally. I'm there as a mature student, so I'm kind of breaking the mold. And in the psychology bit, we've tackled on gender a tiny bit, and we've learnt that domestic violence is not a generational issue, it's a gendered one. All information
I know,
that's
the prevalent thinking, you're quite right. And if you want to get your degree or whatever you have to get, you toe the line or you'll be in trouble.
I am toeing the line. I'm using empirical data that says both arguments to equal measure. I'm giving them what they want, but I'm also giving them the contrary point of view in equal amounts.
Good.
And are you getting a lot of pushback on that, or are you getting some respect for that, or somewhere in between?
Well, after a few people, I've managed to explain to them I'm a secular humanist. So really, I'm not part of the MRI. I was an atheist up until feminism managed to infect that as well. And, yes, we all remember that little bit of Hayward, don't we?
That atheism plus business, yes, I remember it well. But anyway,
and the
so
people that...
Is it okay to ask where you go to school, where you're doing your studies?
I've already said Wiltshire College.
I'm sorry, you're correct. Go ahead then. I'm sorry.
The people that listen to me and actually accepted the fact I'm a secular humanist go, hang on, if you're a secular humanist, doesn't that mean you support equality, therefore you support feminism? And I've said to them, the rough idea of feminism, that the average person in a coffee shop or the average person on the street knows about in England, yes, I do support that women do need help when they are being oppressed. However, when have women been oppressed? I have never seen evidence to that. Has anyone else?
Yes, I have. Just go and live in the Middle East. I mean, there is serious oppression. I mean, even I was in Bahrain helping to open the refuge there, the first refuge in the Arab world, and there is no contraception. And women are married off to men at the age of 12. I mean, there's a lot of oppression. Yeah.
And
wow, that's shocking.
Mutilation in Africa.
Oh, and in England, but one of our problems is the genital mutilation goes on everywhere.
Well, to give you, although I won't say you're incorrect that women suffer from oppression in those areas of the world. I do think even in this area we suffer from a deficit of seeing that through our own lens and not being able to see the areas where men are victimized and men are trapped by the very same system, and simply calling it patriarchy won't do. You know, there was a remarkable study done of so-called honor killings in the Middle East, and this is usually when a father or a husband will kill his daughter or his wife, but one of the studies showed when they looked at it and asked them, you know, those who are participating in these honor killings of women, in a majority of cases, the man killed the woman at the behest of the women in his life. Usually his mother. It'll be your mother telling you to kill your wife or ex-wife or whatever, or your wife telling you must go kill your daughter to assuage the family honor. And that doesn't, of course, make the killer less culpable, but the woman gets plausible deniability for that. So I would only say there are complicated factors there before we simply assume it's just women's oppression. That doesn't mean women don't need help, though.
Yeah, no, I agree, but again, it's a family issue. It's how families operate, not men or women, families, and how they've operated through the history.
Cyril, did you have another question or observation you wanted to make?
No, it was just about the education and psychology classes I'm doing and how gender-tainted they are.
But you're finding that you're able to push through and make at least some changes in attitudes there?
Not at all, actually. I've been called a misogynist by everyone, except for a very few that actually know what a secular humanist is.
Well, so the problem remains in England.
Especially amongst the young.
Especially amongst the young.
Yes, the older people are a little more mature, luckily.
But you see, the whole thing for young people, for young women anyway, this whole concept, it's so attractive. What the on offer is a woman can have anything she wants. She's entitled. And she can do what she wants and have all this equality. But in fact, unfortunately, the idea isn't about equality between men and women. It's about superiority of women to men. And that's one of the major problems.
If they were for genuine equality, I'd be fighting banks alongside them and storm the bloody beaches with them.
But they're not.
Yes, that's the problem.
Yep.
Well, one of the things I'm going to hope, you said you're a mature student, Cyril, but one of the things I hope is that people like you entering academia, wherever you are in your career, and others entering academia now, well, you've got to be careful because you might be denied tenure, you might be thrown off track or whatever, but if you can basically be a subversive, putting little bits of what the actual peer-reviewed research shows in there, I have a great deal of hope that, you know, it's not bad everywhere, Professor Fiebert here says it's not so bad at California State University, so that gives us some hope that it can change. This is a question I wanted to ask you, Professor Fiebert, because
you said that there was people had challenged certain things. What were you going to say about that?
Here is what I have found among people who don't just, and it is usually, like Sir was saying, it is usually young people, believe it or not, who are the most obnoxious to me about it. But calling liar, blah blah, apologists for wife beaters and all that, which is nonsense. But among the slightly more mature people who are resistant, here is the most common argument I hear. Oh, all right, sure, Fiebert and those people are right. Women hit about as often as men do. But come on, get real. Women are 4 times as likely to be killed. They're 10 times as likely to be seriously injured. One guy recently used one of the silliest, I'll say the silliest lines I ever heard. I've met many a girl with a mean right hook, but I've never met one without a glass jaw. The bottom line is they're saying, what you're saying is irrelevant, sir, because girls can't hurt guys, and men kill their women at far greater rates than women kill men. So Fiebert is full of it.
Those are important arguments, and those are the things that I think are as a scientist, are worth examining. So when it comes to homicide, we have some data from some studies, some FBI studies that show that it's about a 60-40 ratio of number of men killed versus number of women. So it's not quite parity there, but it's there's a significant number of men who are killed by women in intimate relationships.
So wait a minute. I'm going to stop you right there for a sec, because you just said 60-40, which is not quite parity. What I keep having thrown at me, I don't know, well, at least one person referenced U.S. CDC thing, but claimed men were 4 to 5 times as likely to murder their wives or girlfriends as vice versa. Are you saying that it's real, that 4 to 4, that's not realistic?
It depends on what data set you're looking at. I'm looking at a data set that was collected by the FBI, and I think it's over a 10-year period from 1980 to 1990. That shows that it's as I said, about a 60-40 split. Warren Farrell, who has written about partner violence, says that women are more likely to go undetected in their murder of their spouses because they are more likely to hire.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, that's absolutely true in my experience.
And to poison their partners and be able to get away with it. So he's closer to thinking that it's a 50-50 split. Those are some of the issues involved there. Now, when it comes to injuries, I think that the John Archer study that was published in Psych Bulletin, which is the most respected journal in the field of psychology, again also comes at, in terms of injuries, it's about a 60-40, that serious injuries, that men are seriously injured 40% of the time in certain cases, and women are injured 60% of the time. Murray Strauss has been looking at this for many years. Initially said it was a 4-to-1 ratio of serious injuries of women to men, but has come around more recently to look at it as closer to 2-to-1. And I have looked at a number of studies that show that it's pretty equal. Men are less likely to go to emergency rooms with the same injuries that women will go to emergency rooms with. So I think that those are the kind of arguments you can present to people who are dismissing it as you say, 10-to-1 or issues like that, because there are some empirical studies that show that it's closer to parity.
Let me ask you, will we maybe find data on that on the Partner Abuse State of Knowledge project that we were talking about earlier?
Yes, you will. Yes, you will. And also in my latest publication, I separated out some of the categories of studies, and homicide studies and studies about dating. When we look at the dating data, young people from the ages of, we'll say, 12 to 20, unmarried individuals who are dating in public school and in high school, we find that women are much more likely, girls are much more likely to attack their male partners than boys are to attack their female partners.
So they're actually more likely to hit than men. Women more likely to hit.
We're using the Strauss-Gellis scale that goes from pushing, shoving, hitting, using objects to attack your partner, to using weapons and things like that. So it's a graded scale that goes from mild to moderate to severe aggression.
So you can find information on this at the Partner Abuse State of Knowledge project, which again is domesticviolencefacts.org. And you're also saying, Marty, it's in your paper that's in Sexuality and Culture, references examining assaults by women on their spouses or male partner.
Yes.
You'll find information on that in there too. Awesome. And that's something I definitely urge everybody to look into. I have another caller on the line who's been waiting patiently, Miriam.
And this will be my last chance to, since I got to do some stuff here. But
no problem. We appreciate the time you've given. Miriam, can we bring Miriam on the line, please?
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Hello, is this Miriam?
Yes.
Hi,
yes,
Miriam. What can we do for you this morning? Thank you for calling in.
Yeah, we have a current case now, and I just want to be brief and just relay the fact that false allegations are very terrifying. The courts will target a woman and say she is complicit if she supports her husband, and they will throw out all the evidence and testimony to convict the man based on the woman's the complainant's word alone. And since the conviction, we've had a death threat. The paper did not detract vicious comments that were made, which I think incite violence. It's a very frightening experience. It's terrorized our family. The intended target is innocent. So
Miriam, can I ask you generally where you live, Miriam?
In Ontario. I live in Toronto now.
Oh, you are in Ontario, and you're saying that a man in your life was falsely accused, or you believe you're confident he was falsely accused?
Oh, yes, he was convicted.
He was convicted, and you maintain his innocence, and you are saying that you were considered complicit and your testimony wasn't allowed?
Yes, the judge threw out all the evidence, and the judge said in order to make it plausible, because ordinarily it wouldn't be plausible at all, he said that I was complicit, and that would make it stick.
This is a story I hear a lot from Canada, especially, that the court just will not believe a woman can be violent and just will not believe a woman is likely to lie at all. Out of curiosity, I know you say you have to go, Marty, but have you or any of the people you work with on these papers that we've mentioned or these projects we mentioned actually looked at the prevalence of false allegations in your work?
I have not looked at that issue at all. Yeah.
Okay.
It's particularly bad in Canada because I know that, especially women going into shelters, it happens in England as well. They're often advised by the feminist lawyers to use false allegations to get what they want. In Canada, if you don't get the divorce because you say he's been violent to you, they call it the silver bullet. The silver bullet is that the woman then claims he's been molesting his children.
Well, it's probably not fair to Professor Fiebert to ask him to opine too much on the subject of false allegations if he's done no empirical study on it.
No. I know that there's who's it? Is it John Dutton who's in Canada?
Don Dutton.
John Dutton. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. He's done some very important work, and I thought he's.
Yeah, we're hoping to talk to him.
And in fact, it's fun that you mentioned it. Makes a nice segue for me to announce that Don Dutton will probably be our guest on our next episode.
Oh, that's great.
So I'm glad you brought him up. Mary, I'm very sorry for what's happened. I will take you at your word, given everything I know, that you're correct and that your love the man in your life who you love has been falsely accused. I'm very sorry that's happened to you. I believe we will likely be examining that topic in a future show. Now, Professor Fiebert, you said you had to go.
Yes. Thank you for inviting me. And
let me just say real quick. I've got 2 or 3 other callers on the line who want to talk. We're going to go ahead and stay on the air to talk to them. But is there any final remarks you would like to make before leaving our audience, Professor?
No, I applaud you for your program and bringing information to the public, and hopefully, since Erin is coming to California, perhaps we can get together and
like we did in England. You remember we had lunch in England together?
I know.
With your beautiful partner, so I'll never forget that.
Right. Hopefully we'll connect when you come to California.
Sure,
and,
lovely.
Hopefully the conference will work out time-wise for...
that would be great to have you there. I'd love that.
Okay.
I'd love to meet you there. I'd love to meet you there, Marty. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Professor Martin Fiebert of California State University, Long Beach. I'm going to mention again, go to domesticviolencefacts.org, where you will find much of the information he mentioned. And if you go to his homepage on the California State University, Long Beach webpage, you'll find a current, both an older and a current copy of the famed Fiebert bibliography, which you can see overwhelmingly studies going back decades. There is parity in domestic violence, and women are as likely, if not more likely, to be physically aggressive. On hold now, we have another caller who would like to speak. Bye-bye, Professor Fiebert. Thank you so much. On hold now, we have James. James, who wants to talk about something called the Mankind Conference. James, are you with us?
Yeah, I am. Yes, I'm talking from Portsmouth, and tribute to Erin there with you, and Martin has just gone. And I went to the Mankind Conference in Slough near London a couple of days ago.
Wonderful. So I'm so pleased to hear from you, because I'm a patron for that charity.
Yes, I was hoping to meet you, but I think you have to be in about 4 different places at once in the world, don't you? So you can't split yourself up, I'm afraid. But I'm hoping to meet you one day. I do Men's Matters Radio, and I'm just putting together a few recordings from the interviews I took from at the end of the conference. So I got about 9 or 10 of them, so that's quite good. And it was quite a good success, but the way it worked was at the beginning of the conference.
When was this conference, James? When was this conference, James, and where was it?
It was on Thursday, 2 days ago, on Thursday.
On the 10th. On the 10th of October.
On the 10th of October, that's right, yeah. It was an all-day conference, and, at the start of it, they had a Crown Prosecution Service person came out with the usual feminist stuff, that there's only 16% of victims are male and all that stuff. And I had to stand up and say something, and I put it rather strongly, that, whilst you've got campaigns to stop violence against women and girls, that itself is a deterrent for male victims to come forward. And, and I said to her, I said, you go back and you ditch the title. Get rid of it, because it's not helpful. It's bad enough trying to get men to go to the doctor, and I'm as bad as anyone else for that. But to come forward and put forward and say that you are a victim is extremely difficult for a lot of men and boys as well, because it's not in their nature to do that. And anyway, what was very good, because in the afternoon we had a Dr. Nicola Graham Kevin and Dr. Erin. Yeah, she's absolutely fantastic. And Dr. Erin Bowen, they would have been there in the morning, except for the fact they were on Woman's Hour. And,
yes, that's right. I heard about that.
Yes, and what gets me is whenever you get these programs, they always have a caveat that says, but women are greater sufferers, and they put this in every time. So they drive.
Yeah, but you've got to understand. Listen, James, Women's Hour is heavily feminist. It always has been.
Yes.
So the fact that we've got two women on who are actually able to say what they had to say, it's fantastic. It's historical.
Well, they used Martin Fiebert's evidence and Dr. and John Dutton and a few others. They were using longitudinal studies of qualitative nature, and the thing is that impressed me about those two ladies, their depth of knowledge and breadth of knowledge was fantastic. And I actually got up and said to Nicola, I said, I could actually listen to you day and night. And she made the joke, well, I don't think my husband feels the same way. But she was lovely. But it was a very good conference. I think everybody came out of it enlightened by it. One of the things which was interesting, we had a John Campbell from Thames Valley Police. And when it was put to him that, there was a default position that you only arrest men, he said, if we are in doubt, we arrest both partners. Now, that is a breakthrough if that's the case.
Huge,
but that's not the case I found with Portsmouth and Hampshire police. They still stick to the arrest man only type thing. But yes, it was very good. What I wanted to pick up on was my wife's she's always concerned about it, bless her, and I've picked this up from others as well, and that is the fear aspect. People are afraid to come forward. My wife's always afraid that some threat is going to come through the phone because of whatever I do, in my campaigning. And this I've come across with other campaigners as well. Some of them are afraid to speak up. And listening to about, children in schools and things like that, there is an air of fear. And fear is a means of oppression and control. And I was just wondering how widespread this is, because, we're talking about a global attitude almost. It's, for it to be accidental is extremely unlikely. And I do know that the feminist movement across the world is very well funded by some very powerful and rich people. I'd just like to hear what Erin's comments on that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because, the fact is that it's $1 billion industry, and the fight is going to be, for those of us who have always known the truth, and we have been fighting for 40 years now. But the good thing, James, and I think it's important to say this, it has changed enormously from the days when there would be pickets out, and I had the bomb squad saying that there was a possibility that anything that came to my house would have to go to the bomb squad first. That's changed a lot. And my feeling is that we're now at a really interesting tipping point. The general public and conferences like that, fantastic. The fact that two women could sit on Women's Hour of all the programs and say, hey, the truth is this is not about patriarchy. This is about generations of family violence. And it is changing. And I'm very excited about it. And Dean was up in Toronto with everybody else there. And Toronto, of all places, of all the countries that I've been to on this subject, Canada is by far the most frightening.
Let me ask real quick. James, you said you're with Men Matters Radio, right?
That's right, yeah. Well, it was my own creation, and I got it going through a local community radio station called Express FM, which is a local Portsmouth one. And they set me off, and they've been very good in supporting me with equipment and that. So it doesn't cost me a lot except for time,
If I'm not mistaken, you comment now and then on A Voice for Men in the articles there. Is that you're the same, James? Okay. I believe we have featured a YouTube video or two of yours showing your show on A Voice for Men. My next question would be, where can people find Men Matters Radio? Where can they find your show?
They just have to type in Men's Matters Radio on Google, and I think it will take you to them. I can always email you the connection points, but I've got a YouTube section because I found that the local radio station, no disrespect to them, were having to censor some of the stuff I did because of that's part of the game. I didn't put anything out which was libelous, but they felt that some of the stuff was a little bit controversial, and things like, you know, if you had people crying, and that they found it was too emotional for people to listen to. So on YouTube, there's a bit more freedom to say what you want to say and put over your point. But yes, if you just Google in Men's Matters Radio, you should be able to find it.
Perhaps one of these days we'll ask you to come and be a guest on this show, James. But just to tell us about your show and what you're seeing. But you're saying you were at this men's conference in where was it again? I'm sorry, I feel foolish.
It's a place called Slough, which is a town just outside London. It's not far from London, and it's actually.
Was that the one that Glenn Sachs was organizing?
I'm not sure who was organising, but
no, it was Mankind itself.
Yeah, Mankind itself.
It would be Mankind.
The actual it would probably make more sense than Slough itself, but it's the place, the centre of Mars bars, the people who make the actual chocolate confectionery. They're the ones who actually sponsored the place and allowed them to use the facilities, which is excellent that a major corporation is actually supporting a men's violence campaign.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
I think something that you said there. I think something that you said there cannot be understated. I've had people, and I've often had trouble like knowing how to answer this. You said something that I think was critical. What is wrong with posters that are against violence against women? And I to me, it is so intuitively obvious what's wrong with posters that and campaigns against quote-unquote violence against women. But I may seem like an articulate fellow, but my brain locks up in trying to succinctly explain to people why this is a problem, why you shouldn't be phrasing it that way. Because, what, are you saying violence against women is okay and the bitches are asking for it? What's your way of answering that?
Well, personally, I actually loathe genderizing violence, because I think violence is violence regardless of whoever the victim is or the perpetrator, and I don't support any violence against women, men, or especially children, and I don't so putting up a poster which is opposing violence, it depends on the poster. If it's going to sort of demonise a particular group, then yes, that's a bit off the cuff. That's not correct. The idea should be to watch out for each other, to be aware of problems that may occur. But I don't like genderising violence, and I think Erin's fought for years to degenderise things. The violence is not a gender issue, and I 100% agree with what she says.
But I think we're getting there, you know. I really do. More and more people are beginning to recognise it's a generational problem. It's a family problem. It's existed for thousands of years.
Yes.
Well, and I think you hit on something there, James, which bears repeating, which is that when you make your campaign all against violence against women, men become more afraid to speak up about their own experience of being victims. It actually, not only does it hurt the self-image of boys, I believe it strongly hurts the self-image of boys.
It does indeed.
Because it makes them think, I am masculine, I am male, therefore I am bad.
Yes.
Yes. That's something I felt from a very early age. But it also makes men more afraid to report their own experiences.
Yes. I mean, they've got... when I was at the conference, there was a group called Healing Men... Net. It's by I think Tony Stott was a advocate for that, but he's from Wales, and they were saying about how the Welsh Assembly are targeting boys in schools to teach them not to be violent. And Erica Bowen made a comment on that, and she said, well, good luck to them trying, because from her experience, when they've targeted boys, the boys have come out of the classes and said, well, that's a bit gendered, isn't it? So the boys themselves are waking up to how they are being targeted, and they're not accepting it lying down. They're not just taking what they've been told. They see it for what it is. And I'm pleased to say that when I was at this conference, there were a number of, I should say, women's aid advocates there, but some of those have stopped calling their groups Women's Aid. They've gone over to other names to become gender neutral. And that was very, very encouraging.
Excellent. Absolutely excellent.
Yeah. It has caused strife within Women's Aid, the organisation itself, and obviously, as you know, Erin, it's a very big charity.
It's actually, yes, it's a very, very wealthy charity, and what they do is if you do not actually espouse the feminist causes, you cannot affiliate to Women's Aid, but it is changing, and it's causing a lot of grief, and my feeling is that there's younger generations of women coming up who don't buy the lie any longer.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Yeah, and actually there was there's a lady from Scotland. I think she was representing abused men from Scotland, and it was Women's Aid Scotland. It was, and they'd set up. I think it was to set up a refuge for men and 2 for women. They had 2 for women, 1 for men, but because they'd set up, they had men working in the refuge. They were forced to de-affiliate with Women's Aid.
Yeah, they won't let men work in refuges.
That's right. Yeah.
And they won't let boys into refuges over the 9 years old. Some 12, but those boys can't come in.
That's right, which is outrageous because you could have a genuinely, hurt woman who actually is being abused with a 12-year-old son, and what's she going to do? She's needed as much as somebody who's got a 6-year-old son. It's crazy.
Well, they've got away with this for something like 40 years, and it's got to come to an end because it's fraud on a huge scale.
Yes.
Well, and I think that is one of the problems we're going to have to face. I believe we have a two-pronged problem, if I can get on my soapbox. I think we have problem A, which may even have I'll just say I believe it probably has a biological basis, but culture matters every bit as much, if not more so, of this protect the women. So especially, I think, I bet especially young women and young men, especially, their instincts just say, "Oh, hit a girl! Oh, you're bad!" and the rational part of them turns off. So I think we have to fight past that, and to get people to say, "Wait a minute, you know as well as we do. You've seen girls hit. You know women can be violent." And I don't know anybody actually who I've asked who said, "Have you ever seen a woman physically attack a man and just seen the man backing off and freaking out?" And they'll almost always, if they're calm, admit that they have seen this. But there's that emotional reaction you have to first overcome. But then you have the bigger problem, which is the money. And we keep getting accused of being conspiracy theorists, but there is so much money. Government funds, United Nations funds, and charitable funds.
It's jobs for the girls, Dean. They've carved out an empire that excludes men, and essentially it's jobs for the girls, and they're not going to give them up without a huge fight.
No.
Well, James, I thank you for calling in. We're going to have to wrap the show soon, and I have one more caller I want to get to. I'd love for you to shoot me an email at dean@avoiceformen.com. Just that easy, dean@avoiceformen.com. Maybe we'll bring you onto our show one of these days. Did you have anything else you wanted to ask about or say anything about?
Yeah, I've been on the show before about a year or two ago, but the next show will be coming out in the next week for my Men's Matters one, and it will be about the conference at in Slough. I should say at the Mars Centre. I'm now advertising Mars, aren't I? Because they've been so good. So,
hey, I'm going to go buy a Mars bar today just because you told me they let that conference happen. I'm going to go buy myself a Mars bar.
But they were handing out free Maltesers, and I was so busy trying to do interviews, I missed out on them. So they had big bags of Maltesers. So I love Maltesers.
Excellent. Well, everybody be sure to look for Men's Matters Radio. And I know James has a channel on YouTube where he occasionally puts up episodes too. Thank you so much for calling in, James. I really appreciate it. We have Michael who's been waiting on the line patiently. He is going to be our last caller because we're running out of time. Can we bring Michael on the line, please?
Hello, Dean. Can you hear me?
Hello, Michael. We can hear you just fine. How are you today?
I'm great. And how are you?
Excellent.
Thank you. It's an honor to be on this show, and I wanted to ask about sexual intimate violence survey. And the issue that got me interested in it is I came on YouTube on a feminist video made by Daniel Craig and Judy Dench, for the International Women's Day in 2011, where they mentioned a lot of bogus claims of supposed women's inequality, and this got me curious or angry enough to research the particular claims in more detail and refute it.
Okay. Now, I'm having a little trouble hearing you, so we might want to have you speak up a little bit, but if I heard you correctly, you said you wanted to ask about sexual violence?
Sexual intimate violence surveys.
Actual, I'm sorry, are you saying the word sexual or are you saying the word actual?
Sexual intimate violence.
Okay, sexual intimate violence, which is a subcategory of...
I'm sorry about the bad quality of some input microphone in the laptop.
That's all right. So you were saying that you had gotten an interest and started looking at the matter of sexual intimate violence between men and women.
Exactly. And I came about it because of a video made by Daniel Craig and Judi Dench for the International Women's Day in 2011. And they had a lot of supposed claims of women's inequality in it. And this was one of them.
When we hear about women's inequality and feminism, I find that there's two bits of pushback I get in here constantly. One is what I mentioned to Professor Fiebert earlier. People will say, okay, I believe you, women will hit as often as men, but they just don't get hurt, so it's not serious. Well, that's nonsense. They get hurt a lot, and it is serious. And the other thing that gets thrown at me a lot is, well, but men rape women, and women rarely are sexual aggressors. Now, I don't know if you know, Michael, or if our listeners know, a few weeks ago we had an episode with Philip Cook, who has recently published a very, very good book called When Women Sexually Abuse Men. And Michael, I would recommend that book to you. You might want to look through our archives and look for the episode we did with Philip Cook, because, and Erin even had some interesting stories to tell on that, of women she had known who were sexually abusive toward adult males and toward children. You've seen that, haven't you, Erin?
Yes, I certainly have. Yes, on many occasions.
And this is a statistical area that is vastly underreported on. So I assume you've done some research and you have found, like a lot of people have, that women are more sexually aggressive than almost anybody wants to hear.
Yeah, but I found actually two surveys that contradict each other, like the one from the National Intimate Sexual Violence survey, I think it's called. It found pretty much parity, while for the England and Wales crime survey, they reported that men have only 1/5 of the chance to fall victim to sexual violence, and I don't know how those numbers can contradict each other this much.
Okay. Easily, because so much feminist information is fraudulent.
Okay, what Michael was saying there, in case anybody didn't hear, is that he is finding studies that appear to contradict each other, some of which suggest that women are something like at parity for their likelihood to commit sexual assault, sexual crimes, or that men are somewhat at parity at being victims of women as vice versa. There's arguments, bleeding, is it exact parity or just rough parity? And there's others that overwhelmingly report almost no male victimization by females. Erin just gave one response on that, which is there is feminist misinformation on that. I'll accept her assertion at face value. I'll tell you one way to accomplish misinformation, or maybe it's not intentional misinformation, it's just your methodology. When you conduct a study, how you ask the questions will get you massively different results. I think one of my favorite examples of this, although it's old, it's still relevant. There was a study which they asked women a range of questions, and any time a woman indicated basically any form of sexual contact that made her at all uncomfortable, including up to, I had sex with him when I didn't really feel like it, bang was noted as a rape statistic, and B, simply did not report how often men reported the same thing. And when you ask men, you find out men are about pretty close to likely to say the same things. They've had sex when they didn't really want to. They've had sex when they were passed out drunk and found themselves in the middle of having sex with somebody. They've been fingered, whatever. So some of the studies get away with it by not asking men at all. There's also what I've seen, and what I've seen is that short studies that ask, like, has any of the following happened to you in the last year? Men and women are about as likely to say it's happened to them in the last year. But then you look at other studies which say, has this ever happened to you in your lifetime? Women are much more likely to say it's happened in their lifetime than men are. Now, I've had that thrown at me as evidence that clearly women are therefore more often victims. The only thing I can respond to on that is say, but wait a minute, that's mathematically not possible. Unless you believe that in the last few years there's been a massive surge of on male sexual assaults, unless you believe that, then something else may be going on. And the best explanation I have, although I'm open to hearing others, is that when a man is pressured, let's say he's drunk, he's passed out at a party, he wakes up, some woman is fondling him, maybe even, I'm sorry to be so graphic about it, but maybe even straddling him and riding him, because this happens, he may not hold on to that memory and ruminate on it 10, 20, 30 years later. Like, I've had this experience where I've asked men that I knew, have you ever been sexually assaulted by a woman? And I'm like, well, no. And then I'll carefully ask them, like, did you ever, like, when you were younger, find yourself in a period where suddenly you found a woman was you didn't even like or weren't even attracted to was giving you a hand job? And they're like, oh, I remember that. That was really disturbing. That's not a sexual assault.
Yeah.
It seems like men are, I don't know where it comes down. Is that because men are less traumatized by those experiences? Or is it because we encourage women to feel more traumatized and we encourage men not to feel traumatized by it? I don't know. What do you think, Erin?
I think it's probably a question of men are expected to, trauma for men is seen so differently from women. In a sense, a man grows up feeling that whatever happens to him, he has really no right to complain because he is a man. And that, yes, if some woman has actually... It's also how other men feel about what a man says. And if a man says, this happened to me and it really disturbed me, he's a wimp. If a woman says, this happens to me and it really disturbed me, she's immediately a victim. We have a terrible double standard between men and women.
This is a line I'll steal from psychotherapist Tom Golden. A woman's pain is a call to action. A man's pain is a call to mocking.
That's true.
And I don't know if we'll ever get to where we completely change our attitudes on it, but my God, I'd like to see somewhat more balance in it.
Well, I would too, because you see, my feeling is men are terrified. The weapon that women have is ridicule.
It is.
And it's so interesting that you have to stop women mid-speech sometimes and say, can you rewind and listen to what you're doing? Because it's so embedded, this idea, you just make fun of a man or a boy, you shame him. Men react enormously to being shamed.
They do. I had a feminist get very angry with me recently and call me a misogynist because I said women have the power to shame men, and men need to stop automatically accepting it when a woman shames him. And she immediately called me a misogynist. I said, oh, okay. I hate women because I say men should stand up for themselves. Okay. You can't argue with that, can you?
It's also watching how mothers deal with their boys. That's where it starts. They shame their little boys, and that's one of the ways of controlling them. I'm ashamed of you. And little boys that the side of a little boy that wants to protect his mother to look up to him. You shame him, and before very long, he grows into a very ashamed, grown-up man.
Well, Michael, we're getting near the end of the show. Did you have any other question you wanted to ask?
No, I just thank you that you answered, and I think it's very important to look at the different statistics honestly. I think that is maybe one pathway to come to a solution of gender questions, to really look at the statistics honestly and in detail, and don't fuck around with the statistics, if I can say that.
I agree completely, Michael. Thank you so much for your call, and actually,
thank you, Michael.
Yeah, for having the courage to talk about this. I will mention again that we had Philip Cook on discussing when women sexually abuse men, which is a book you should buy. It's a show you should listen to that you'll find on the Blog Talk Radio Voice for Men archives going back just a few weeks ago. Philip W. Cook. It's a great show. It's an important topic. Well, Erin, we're getting near the end of the show, so right. I would like to make a couple of brief announcements again, or repeat them. Next week, in this same time slot, we will be featuring the return of Tales from the Infrared, which is our geek culture from a men's rights, red pill perspective, which will be hosted by our very own Christian Shiasan of Men's Human Rights Ontario. He will be the host. I'll be there to help him, and maybe some others too. And he'll be on alternating weekends. Erin and I will be on one weekend. He'll be on the next, and so on. Our guest today was Martin Fiebert. I'm going to mention again, please, if you get a chance, go to domesticviolencefacts.org to look at the astonishing amount of data he's got there, as well as his new paper, The Bibliography of References Examining Assaults by Women and Their Spouses or Male Partners. Great peer-reviewed paper with more references than you can count on why there is parity in gender violence. Erin, anything you want to, any parting thoughts for the audience?
No, I think overall, I think programs like this, and particularly with Marty's help, and the people who are now willing to come and talk openly, for me, it's kind of a miracle, because I remember these sort of conversations you sort of had quietly in the background because you didn't want anybody to hear in case they either picketed you or you had midnight phone calls threatening you. And thank God the climate's changed, and it's becoming so much more positive. That's what I'd like to say.
I agree with you, although we've got a long way to go. It's happening. I did get a note from Attila Winzer, who will be sponsoring that conference that you will be at and I will be at in Toronto in May. He did want to mention that men do not, this is quoting a note from him, men do not need to suffer in silence, and they need to speak up about domestic violence. We care, and we do not want to see men taking their lives thinking there is no help. Absolutely right. Yes, Erin?
Yes, absolutely. I'll be there in May.
All right, everybody. We'll see you again in 2 weeks, hopefully, probably with Professor Don Dutton. Thank you all for being there. Remember, men and boys' rights are human rights. Christian, take us home, if you would, please.
You have been listening to Revelations with Erin Pizzey and her co-host, Dean Esme. Our show's opening music is called Eternal Hope, and the closing piece is called Sunshine. Both pieces are by Kevin MacLeod and are used under the Creative Commons Attribution License, with a link in the show notes. We also wish to thank James Huff and Paul Elam, and indeed all those who are part of the A Voice for Men community for their support for this show. Remember, in truth there is hope and healing, and we hope that you will be part of helping to spread the truth and the healing. Please join us next time in Revelations with Erin Pizzey.